So let's dive into one of the most chilling and persistent mysteries of the 20th century. Picture this. February 1959, 9 incredibly experienced ski hikers head into the remote Ural Mountains in Russia. They never come back. And when searchers finally find their campsite, the scene is so utterly bizarre, so terrifying, it launches a mystery that has captivated people for more than 60 years. Today, we're going to conduct a kind of scientific autopsy on the whole thing, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. To really understand what might have happened, you have to go back to their last 48 hours, which we've been able to piece together, incredibly, from their own diaries and recovered cameras. On January 31st, they were getting ready for the toughest part of their trip. But by February 1st, the weather just turned on them, pushing them off course and onto the slopes of a mountain called Kholat Shakhal. Ominously, the local Mansi name for that mountain is Dead Mountain. And it was right there, on that totally exposed slope, that they made the fatal choice to set up camp for the night. And this, right here, is the question at the absolute heart of the mystery. When rescuers found their tent weeks later, it was obvious the group hadn't just, packed up and left. They had fled in sheer terror. The tent wasn't unzipped. It was slashed open from the inside. They ran from whatever was happening in there, leaving everything behind. Their shoes, their coats, all their gear. And they fled into this. Temperatures on that mountain that night dropped as low as -40 degrees Celsius, with brutal hurricane-force winds. To run out of a tent without proper gear in those conditions, that's not just panic, it's an absolute death sentence. Okay, so let's jump into the original 1959 investigation. The evidence they found was so strange, so full of contradictions, that for decades it fueled all kinds of wild speculation. We're talking everything from secret weapons tests to UFOs. Soviet authorities needed an answer, but every single clue just made the whole thing even more of an enigma. The medical examination found something really odd. There were 2 completely different patterns of death. The first 5 bodies they found had clearly died from hypothermia. They froze to death. But then, 2 months later, the last 4 were discovered deep in a ravine, and their injuries were just horrific. These weren't from the cold. No, 3 of them had suffered catastrophic internal trauma. And here is where we get to the core medical paradox of this whole case. The hikers with these devastating internal injuries, we're talking crushed ribs, fractured skulls, they had almost no external wounds. No major cuts, no bruises, nothing that looked like a fight. The medical examiner actually described the force as being comparable to a car crash, but somehow their skin was mostly untouched. It's as if they'd been squeezed by some kind of immense, invisible pressure. Listen to this. The lead medical examiner, Dr. Boris Vozrozhdeny, was totally certain. He stated, on the record, that the force needed to cause these injuries was just too immense, and he officially ruled out a human attacker. That one conclusion, right there, just threw the most obvious explanation out the window and made the mystery 100 times deeper. And the scene itself just made things even more confusing. There were only the hikers' footprints leading away from the tent, no one else's, and the prints suggested they were walking, not running in a blind panic. There were 0 signs of a struggle. They were just scattered. Some were found near a small fire they tried to build, others looked like they were trying to crawl back to the tent, and then those last 4 were way down in the ravine. So with no clear suspect, no rational explanation, and, let's be honest, a lot of pressure in the Soviet era to just close the books, the investigation was shut down. The official cause of death was attributed to a compelling natural force. It's this super vague term that basically meant one thing. We have no idea what happened. The case files were then classified and buried in a secret archive. And for 60 years, that vague conclusion was all anyone had to go on. The story became a legend, a ghost story. But then, with new scientific tools and a completely fresh perspective, researchers were able to take another look and re-examine this very, very cold case. Now, you'd think the most obvious natural force would be an avalanche, right? But for decades, that theory was shot down, and for some pretty good reasons. The slope just wasn't steep enough for a typical avalanche, the searchers found no obvious signs of a big slide, and experienced hikers like their leader, Igor Dyatlov, would never, ever have camped in a known avalanche zone. But what if it wasn't a typical avalanche? In 2021, a couple of scientists from 2 Swiss universities published this absolutely groundbreaking study. They used advanced computer models of avalanche mechanics,
And get this, they even used some data from the surprisingly accurate snow physics simulations that were developed for the Disney movie Frozen to propose a brand new theory that addressed all those old arguments head-on.
So, how on earth could a small slide on a gentle slope generate that devastating car crash like force? Well, the answer is in the physics of something called a slab avalanche. See, this isn't about a huge powdery cloud of snow. It's about a smaller, much denser, and heavier block of wind-packed snow sitting on top of a weak layer underneath. Here's how the model suggests it probably went down. First, to shelter their tent from the wind, the hikers cut into the snowpack, and in doing so, they unknowingly created a weak point. Second, these really strong katabatic winds, that's basically dense, cold air just pouring down the mountain, piled a ton of heavy new snow right on top of that weak spot. Third, hours go by, it's the middle of the night, and that weight just becomes too much. The slab cracks, and finally, this dense, solid block of snow, maybe only about 16 feet wide, slides down and just slams into the tent like a battering ram. And just like that, modern physics provides a real concrete explanation for that incredibly vague conclusion from 1959. That compelling natural force finally had a name: a delayed compact slab avalanche. This one theory elegantly solves all the major puzzles. Slashing the tent open isn't a sign of madness. It's the only way you can get out if the entrance is buried under tons of snow. Those horrible internal injuries, they're explained by the crushing force of that heavy snow slab hitting them. And retreating to the tree line, that wasn't an irrational flight. That's textbook survival strategy to get away from a potential second slide. Their actions suddenly seem logical, a desperate, calculated fight for their lives. This new scientific understanding completely reframes the entire tragedy. As the lead investigator in a reopened Russian case concluded just recently, their final hours weren't a descent into panic and chaos. It was a heroic struggle against an unforgiving but scientifically explainable event. They did everything they could, but the mountains simply gave them no chance. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a perfect example of how a mystery can live on for generations, fueled by strange clues and a total lack of answers. But it also shows us that with the right tools and new ways of thinking, even the most baffling puzzles can have rational solutions. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other great unsolved mysteries are out there just waiting for the right science to finally come along and solve them?